This is Tara Carr with Tara Talks, KDIV 98.7 FM. I'm joined with Bobby Howard, a panelist for the upcoming community conversation entitled Standing for Justice While Kneeling. Bobby, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Tara. I really appreciate it. We're excited to have this conversation as well as the one on the 19th.
Absolutely. So just tell me a little bit about the event.
Good. So a good friend of mine, DeAndre Jones, an activist in the community, he reached out to me a couple weeks ago after a lot of kind of the political upheaval surrounding the Colin Kaepernick national anthem demonstrations, the peaceful protests during the national anthem ceremonies before the NFL games.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of anger, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of confusion and offense. And DeAndre said, let's do an event. Let's get some people together who want to talk about this stuff. And we decided to throw an event. And we're looking forward to it.
And so what are you expecting to come of this discussion, of this conversation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think anytime you do something like this, the goal is always understanding. And so I think you got to do two things. You got to help educate people, and then you got to help people open their hearts to what other people are experiencing.
Yeah.
That's the main goal. And a lot of us come at this as educators. A lot of us come at this from a ministry background, and that fits really well with kind of getting people to understand what's going on with these protests, and then getting people to be willing to open up their heart to people whose experiences of the world are pretty different than theirs.
Absolutely. Yeah. And why do you think there has been so much, I guess, resistance or, conversation about this, the peaceful protests with Colin Kaepernick or with other athletes who are choosing to stand up for justice while kneeling in support for Colin Kaepernick?
Right. Yeah, I think the thing is, these protests have always been, throughout our history, have always been really offensive because it's always something that's really jarring. As a white dude who grew up in the South, I've got to be honest, it's still kind of jarring to me when I see an athlete kneeling during the national anthem, because I'm just trained that you're supposed to stand.
This is what you do,
you put your hand over your heart, you stand, you don't say anything, you're quiet.
From
you
elementary,
exactly.
This is what you're told to do.
And so when you see someone, break away from that tradition, you're like, whoa, are we allowed to do that? Is that okay, what he's doing there? And so it's just a matter of it being legitimately offensive. Yeah. And then, these athletes have said, and not just athletes, but other public figures as well who do these kinds of protests, they've said that, they're not protesting the national anthem. They're not protesting our veterans. They're not protesting America. They're protesting something really particular, racial injustice. Yes. And so, when we're doing an event like this, we have to understand that it is legitimately offensive, some of the stuff that's happening. But that's a part of the process when we're moving toward justice, is this initial offense, this initial shock, and then you start the conversation.
Yeah. And how do you think, the peaceful protests that we are seeing today with the kneeling during the national anthem at sporting events, how is that similar to or even different from, some peaceful protests that happened in the civil rights era?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think it's similar in one really important way and then different in another really important way. Right? I think it's different for obvious reasons, like America is different now than it was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And we've changed in a lot of really positive ways. And in light of that, it's really hard for some people who experience America one particular kind of way, people who look like me or people who've had experiences like my experiences. Yeah. It's hard for them to see the need for these kinds of protests because, Black people can vote, for instance.
Exactly.
Jim Crow's done. The obvious manifestations of racism are things of the past. And now, what these athletes are protesting against are a lot more subtle and a lot more ingrained and a lot harder to notice. Yeah. And so it's not as obvious that the racial justice movements that are happening today are necessary. Sure. And so in that sense, they're different. But in another sense, they're just exactly the same. People are still dying unjust deaths, and people are still being disenfranchised. People still are being held back from opportunities that the majority culture has. And in that sense, it's the exact same struggle. It's the same movement, just kind of the next iteration of it.
Yeah, and so what do you think would be an ideal situation or solution where, people could say, okay, we've got what we wanted. When you protest something, you're wanting a result.
Right.
So what do you think, or what do you imagine the end result or ideal situation would be where, people would feel no longer a need to protest?
And that's the question, right? So you've got, what's the fruit of a nationwide conversation like what we're having today about athletes kneeling? I think it's two-pronged. I think it's got to be policy change, and then it's got to be changes in people's hearts at the grassroots level. So people in communities changing their outlooks on different people's experiences of the world. So we want, one thing that would be great, just as an example of policy change, is the criminal justice reform stuff, policing reform, better relationships between law enforcement agencies and the communities that they serve. That these are the kind of the global national conversations that are happening. And then in a place like Northwest Arkansas, where we really are fortunate and we really are lucky to live in the community that we live in, the main gap that we have to fill in is just this lack of understanding, and it's just education, and it's just building these relationships.
Absolutely. And so why should our listeners go to this event, Standing for Justice While Kneeling? How can they get something out of this conversation?
Yeah, so just really practically, we're just going to be a bunch of people sitting up on stage talking about this stuff, and I think it's a forum for people to come express themselves. It's a forum for people to come and be with other like-minded folks. If they have questions to ask, they can ask questions. As well as, we're doing a voter registration activity at the event, so anyone could come who needs to get registered to vote, and we'll help you get registered to vote, as well as a charity outreach. People bring canned goods and benefit a local food service. So
awesome, love it. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you so much. We're really excited about the event. It's great to be in Northwest Arkansas where there's a space and an attitude where people are willing to have this conversation, and we're just really looking forward to it.
Absolutely awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bobby. This is Tara Carr for Tara Talks, KDIV 98.7 FM. The event is Standing for Justice While Kneeling, and that's going to be at the Fayetteville Alps, November 19th at 3 p.m. More information is available at the Standing for Justice While Kneeling Facebook page.